Should you spring for the S24 Ultra or save with the S23? Well, we went hands-on to find out if you should believe the claims or not. We're breaking down the zoom camera battle as well as how these two flagships compare across all categories: display, battery, performance, and design. By the end, you'll know whether upgrading is warranted or if you can save money by sticking with the S23 Ultra without FOMO. Let's dive in. First up, the design. Now, at first glance, these two phones look nearly identical, and the overall footprint is the same: 6.8-inch displays, quad camera arrays on the back, hole-punch front cameras. But Samsung did make some subtle but meaningful changes with the S24 Ultra. For one, they've moved from the armor aluminum frame of the S23 to a stronger titanium frame for the S24 Ultra. And even with the more durable build, the newer phone is actually a hair lighter at 8.22 ounces versus 8.25 ounces. Not a huge difference, but notable. The other obvious change is the shift to a completely flat display on the front. Previous Galaxy S models had curved edges, but Samsung went flat this year. They say it's to improve S Pen support so the pen doesn't slip off the sides as easily. Personally, though, we're a bit torn because we did like the sleek look of those curved edges, but we can see how the flat screen is better for drawing and writing. And rounding out the design changes, Samsung trimmed down the bezels quite a bit from the S23 Ultra, especially along the bottom. This allows the display to take up even more real estate on that front face. So while on the whole, very similar designs between these two flagships, the S24 Ultra does bring small but impactful updates like the lighter titanium build, flat display, and slim bezels. The new colors for the S24 are bolder as well. So advantage S24 Ultra here, but not by a wide margin. Shifting gears to the display, this is where we see nearly identical specs between the S23 and S24 Ultra. They actually use the exact same screen, a 6.8-inch Quad HD Plus dynamic AMOLED panel with a variable 120Hz refresh rate. So on paper, very much a tie. But when we measured the screens with our colorimeter and brightness meter, we did record slightly better performance from the newer S24 Ultra. It registered a bit over 1300 nits peak brightness, whereas the S23 Ultra topped out at 1225 nits. And for color accuracy, the S24 Ultra also had the edge with a phenomenal 0.25 Delta E score. That's very close to perfect. As for actual content, though, we pulled up some videos side by side and could barely tell any difference. Blacks look inky, colors really pop, and high dynamic range content is stellar. So, while Samsung used the same display panel, looks like their latest image processing does eke out a small victory here for the S24 Ultra ultimately, but it's not a massive change really during normal use. The one benefit we could see more people appreciate is that brighter screen when using the S24 outdoors. Over 1300 nits will make it better for combating glare, but both phones still have phenomenal displays overall. The S24 is just a smidge better by the numbers. Now, this is where things get really interesting: the camera department. This is actually the most controversial change with the S24 Ultra. See, Samsung decided to ditch the 10x optical zoom camera from the S23 Ultra and go with a 5x optical zoom camera instead in the new phone. That seems like a downgrade up front. They're using a larger sensor and higher megapixel count with some software processing tricks to try and make up for that lower optical reach. So, how does it actually hold up? Well, we tested these phones extensively, side by side, to find out. And we'd say, overall, for most people and situations, the S24 Ultra is actually as good, if not slightly better, than the S23 Ultra camera. But there are definitely still some cases where you'll wish you had that full 10x optical zoom instead of being capped at 5x. Let us explain. Using the main cameras, there's very little difference in photo quality that we could tell. They use the exact same 200 megapixel sensor after all. Images show an immense amount in detail, colors are vibrant but natural, and dynamic range is excellent. Really had to pixel peep to notice any differences here. Maybe a tiny change in color temperature and contrast in some shots. But switch to portrait mode, and this is one area the S24 Ultra pulls ahead. Skin tones look more natural versus having a slight yellowish tint with the S23 Ultra in some portraits we took, and we prefer the more dramatic background blur effect from the newer phone. Makes photos pop more compared to the flatter, more uniform blur from the S23 Ultra. So for portraits specifically, we'd give the edge to the S24 Ultra. Low-light photos are essentially a wash too. Maybe a hair brighter images from the S24 Ultra just because it leverages the bigger sensor, but we're talking marginal gains. Alright, now on to the controversial telephoto zoom cameras. At mid-range zooms up to 10 times, the S24 Ultra leverages its 5 times optical lens and then uses AI algorithms to make up for the lower optical range. And you know what? Works pretty well. We were fully expecting 10 times zoom shots on the S24 Ultra to look terrible, but in most cases, it keeps pace remarkably close to what the 10-time optical camera on the S23 Ultra can produce. Now, if you really pixel peep, yes, you'll notice some smoothing and processing artifacts on the S24 Ultra, but for social media and typical viewing, totally solid. However, once you go beyond 10 times into true hyperzoom territory, that's when the limitations of the 5 times optical camera rear their head in the S24 Ultra. Basically, shots at 30 times or 100 times just can't stack up to the clarity and detail you get from the 10 times optical camera on the S23 Ultra. That longer native optical zoom range gives it a big advantage for those ultra long-range compositions. So that's an important limitation to keep in mind with the S24 Ultra's camera system. For most everyday shots, it's fantastic, but serious zoom shooters may want to still go for the S23 Ultra here, or otherwise just temper expectations if getting the newer model. We do want to call out too that the videos we shot on both phones came out extremely clean. Footage is sharp and stabilized impressively well, up to even 20 times zoom. For the average user's needs, no problem with the video performance from either phone. Now, all of that compares to standard shooting modes that essentially rely on the optics and sensors built into these phones. But the Galaxy S24 Ultra has a new trick up its sleeve that the S23 Ultra doesn't have. AI-powered software features that can edit and enhance photos and videos after you shoot them. We're talking about things like the generative edit mode that lets you erase objects from the background of photos, or the instant slow-mo tool that adds slow-mo effects with very convincing results to videos that you already shot in normal speed. There are other neat touches too, like the ability to automatically remove unwanted reflections in photos. These new post-processing software capabilities don't turn the S24 Ultra into a powerhouse zoom camera, but they do give it a degree of flexibility and creative options for editing that aren't found in the S23 Ultra at all. That alone could be a deciding factor for people weighing these options. So if we tally it all up, very similar primary cameras between the two phones, with advantages going slightly to the newer S24 Ultra for its brighter sensor and useful AI editing features. But the lower max zoom power is certainly a knock against it for serious zoom shooters. For casual photo takers though, we think most will be perfectly happy with what the S24 Ultra brings to the table here, even if it can't quite replace having a dedicated telephoto lens. Jumping into performance now, the S24 Ultra packs the latest Qualcomm silicone, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 chip. Meanwhile, the S23 Ultra runs the previous gen Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. On paper, that gives a specs advantage to the newer phone. And in benchmarks, we do see a decent jump in both processing and graphics power for the S24 Ultra. It scored around 10% higher in multi-core CPU performance tests, and an even bigger leap of over 40% faster graphics rendering compared to the S23 Ultra. Next up, super important battery life. Now, oddly enough, Samsung stuck with the exact same size 5,000 mAh packs in both the S23 and S24 Ultra flagship phones. Would have liked to see them push the new model even further with a bigger cell. However, thanks again to the efficiencies of the newer Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 chipset, the S24 Ultra posts a good 16+ hours in our custom battery life test, compared to just over 13 hours for the S23 Ultra. Finally, let's talk software and special features. Now, at the core software level, these two phones are nearly identical. One UI version 6.1 on top of Android 14, which delivers a smooth, polished experience all around. Samsung is also promising 7 years of software support for the S24 Ultra, which is super impressive longevity and should ease concerns about future proofing. And all the staples you expect are here. seamless connection with Windows devices, the S Pen for scribbling notes or editing photos, Samsung DeX Mode to use your phone in a desktop-style setup. Note takers, artists, and multitaskers will love those options. But the real differentiation for the S24 Ultra comes from the new Galaxy AI features that leverage machine learning for helpful productivity tricks and camera improvements. This is exclusive to the newer model for now and adds a lot of the wow factor in my opinion. Well, there you have it everyone, the full lowdown on how the Galaxy S24 Ultra compares to the S23 Ultra. We covered all the key categories in detail so you can make an informed decision if upgrading is justified. Let us know which one you think takes the crown.